Wow, what a special weekend. We started with Thanksgiving, and now we're already into Advent. But this is one weekend when many folks, including me, bring the boxes down from the attic or up from the basement, dust them off, begin to carefully and thoughtfully empty the contents. I love ceremonially unpacking our Christmas ornaments, one by one, each with its own special story. There's the glass bulb that we bought on our honeymoon for our very first tree, and it is still intact, and I'm really grateful for that. There are homemade ornaments that the girls lovingly made for us out of Play-Doh and macaroni when they were in elementary school. We love the eclectic collection that we have, but there is one decoration that has a permanent place in our living room. It hasn't been relegated to the basement or the attic. We walk by it every day of the year to help us remember. It is a small nativity scene made of olive wood, but there's something different about this one. You'll see that this manger has a wall between the travelers and the Holy Family. It represents the contentious Israeli-Palestinian conflict that has ravaged that part of the world for decades. The wall's presence undermines attempts at peace negotiations and keeps people apart from loved ones, apart from homes, and the things that make life meaningful. I purchased this nativity 9 years ago at the Wall in Bethlehem. Serving on the denominational executive committee, I was invited to be part of a delegation of several Church of the Brethren and American Baptist leaders. This combined effort was a learning tour of sorts that would help us to better understand the conflict in the Holy Lands. It was intended to help us understand a bit better both the Israeli and Palestinian situation from their perspectives. It's very complicated, and looking back those 9 years, it still isn't clear. But still, there is hope, and there is power in hope. From my journal entry, December 10th, 2012. On the flight from Newark to Tel Aviv, I was seated next to an older and delightful couple from New Jersey, Irv and Phyllis, who liked to banter with each other and join in lively conversation with anyone who was within earshot. I think they would say that they had chutzpah. She is a retired professor of psychology and he a lawyer. It was clear that they loved to travel and they loved people as they shared their adventures of many exotic places. For this trip, their destination was Israel, where they visit several times every year. It's a home away from home for them, and they have many lifelong friends there. We talked a lot about Israel, especially the beautiful and the historic sites, and they freely shared their advice to me, to this first-time visitor to the Holy Lands. They wanted to hear all about my plans. So I showed our itinerary to them, wondering not so much about what they thought of the sights that we would see, but what they might think about the breadth of perspectives of the people we plan to meet. Upon reading our scheduled visits, the highly opinionated, yet open-minded Irv said, this looks very interesting. I wish I could go with your group. Phyllis asked if I would have any opportunities to speak to groups after our trip, to share what I had learned, and I said, well, yes, in fact, we're expected to share the stories that we will hear. And so I asked Irv and Phyllis, in the midst of all the violence, separation, and the hatred often found in that war-torn land, where do you find hope? Phyllis didn't miss a beat. In the children, she said. And before we parted in the Tel Aviv airport, the three of us agreed that indeed there is hope. I invite you to hear these words if you want to advance the slide to the 5th chapter of the book of Micah. But you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are one of the little clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel, whose origin is from of old, from ancient days. Therefore he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has brought forth. Then the rest of his kindred shall return to the people of Israel. And he shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall live secure, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth, and he shall be the one of peace. Among the most beloved of Old Testament texts, these extraordinary verses in Micah speak hope to despair with a clarity and power that would have been nothing less than thrilling to those hearing the message. Things were clearly a mess. Jerusalem was under siege, and the people had lost confidence in the king's leadership. They had been looking for security in all the wrong places. They had trusted the powers that be to rescue them from their grim situation, and now they had lost all hope. But Micah sees hope. He sees beyond the present situation. He sees and he understands what God is promising to do. Micah is a messenger for God's promise that the people would return home from the exile, that they would have enough food, that there would be security, that there would be peace. He is pointing to a small, out-of-the-way place, a town called Bethlehem. He is pointing to a leader who stands in the strength of the Lord rather than in the strength of weapons or power or wealth or land. Here is a difference that makes a difference, and the promise is breathtaking. In these very few verses tucked away in this little book, Micah captures the ache with which the people lived each day and the hope for a future of security and peace. We too oftentimes live with an ache for security and peace. Like the people of Micah's day, we too often look to the powers that be for help, to doctors and lawyers and bankers and public engineers and clergy and professors, news reporters, politicians, to protect us from what threatens and makes us feel vulnerable. Life can be messy. In a world marred by terror, war, poverty, accidents, shootings, pandemics, an Omicron variant, along with the everyday heartaches of old age and illness and death, in these few verses in Micah, we hear God speak again with promises of security and peace that the world cannot give. We are reminded and we understand that God is with us and that we are invited to share with God in the creative power of hope. Hope for the coming of God's reign and hope for a better future for our children and for our children's children. In this season of Emmanuel, God with us, we are reminded again that God is entering the world, and there is hope. It is in the context of the hope that Micah proclaims that I'd like to share with you two stories of hope that I experienced on our trip to Israel and Palestine. These are stories about hope and children. Phyllis would be pleased. And I have some updates to these stories, these 9 years later. Daoud Nassar, and we'll need the next slide, is a Palestinian Christian who lives on the 100-acre family farm just outside of Bethlehem with his wife and children. In the family for generations, the farm crops include olive trees and grapes. And I think we have there we go, some new plantings. Daoud's vision is to complete what his father began before his death, to host a summer camp for local Christian and Muslim children at the farm, to prepare them to make positive contributions to their future and society through the values of understanding, tolerance, and respectful coexistence. The name of the camp is the Tent of Nations. Might sound idyllic, but life has not been easy for Daoud. Far from it. His land is in an area under Israeli rule, and the government would like to take his farm because of its strategic location. So they are making life difficult for Daoud, as they have many other Palestinians. Although the family has clear documentation for their land in the form of an official deed, after 20-plus years in court and more than $150,000 in legal and other expenses, they continue to be told by the powers that be that there is not enough proof of their ownership, and they have been continually threatened with eviction. The family has been bullied by armed soldiers coming to their door. At one point, all of the farm's grape plants were uprooted, 250 olive trees were damaged, and the family's water tanks, which hold a precious commodity in that dry land, were damaged. The military moved enormous boulders across their farm lane, cutting off their access to nearby Bethlehem, causing them to drive several miles the other way to get there. They've been denied building permits, forcing them to build underground using the natural caves of the rocky landscape. You can see here a room that they've built into one of those caves. And yet they continue in spite of these adversities. Daoud explains that their aim is to demonstrate solidarity with the local people and to keep the land productive. He believes that there is still hope for a better future. He said if they were to give up and leave as refugees, the cycle of oppression and separation would continue. Daoud wants to build bridges so that his children will have a better future. He says, "We refuse to be enemies. We refuse to hate. We refuse to be victims. We are called to be peacemakers, not peace talkers." And so youth come to the Tent of Nations and experience a different way, one of reconciliation and nonviolent resistance. With heart and hand, we change the land. As we were leaving the farm, our group prayed with Daoud, and I gave him 2 bags of popcorn that I had taken along. I told him, from a farm in Pennsylvania to a farmer in Palestine. My prayer is that when he and his family pop the corn, they will remember that there are those who stand in solidarity with them, even on the other side of the world. The challenges and the crises continue for Daoud. 6 months ago, his farm was ravaged. This time, it was a fire. Here is what he posted on Facebook just this past May. "Thank you so much for your prayers, phone calls, emails, letters, and messages, and for standing with us in this very difficult time that we are going through. The fire has caused so much damage. We lost a big number of newly planted trees between 3 and 10 years old, and which I'm assuming were the trees that we saw planted when we were there, the very young shoots. We lost a big number of mature trees as well that are 20 to 30 years established. I think that the younger trees are most likely the ones that we saw. The fire department's report concluded that the fire was deliberately started. However, who was behind remains to be seen." And then he continues, and these are Daoud's words, "Hope still rises. With this big destruction, it's not easy to stand up again, but hope still rises, even from the ashes. We are determined to continue this journey without giving up, despite the current struggles. We are people of the resurrection. We have to stand up and start acting, continue to rebuild what was destroyed, and replant the trees of hope for generations to come." He said we would like to ask you to keep us in your prayers, to continue sponsoring trees and to come and help in preparing the ground and planting new trees. Our path is difficult, but we need to keep moving forward with faith, love, and hope. Hope in action, he said. Thank you for your prayers, your support, and your solidarity. And as a word of encouragement, somebody posted in response, "Hope cannot die. It is planted too deep within us and in all of creation." Daoud's strength and bravery is making a difference. During our visit, we asked him what we can do to support him. He said, "Pray for healing for us. Tell our story and spread the words of peace and justice. These are words of hope. This is the creative hope of which Micah speaks." The second story is about a very special ministry that began 25 years ago by pediatric cardiac surgeon Amram Cohen in cooperation with the Wolfson Medical Center in Tel Aviv. Cohen, an Israeli, agreed to provide life-saving surgery to 2 Ethiopian children who lived in a place where such care was not available. And thus was begun the organization Save a Child's Heart, which we learned had repaired the hearts of more than 3,000 children from 44 developing countries around the world. And here's the hope. Just 9 years later, Save a Child's Heart now conducts 30 surgical and catheterization missions in more than 70 cardiology clinics around the world, examining over 9,500 children since its beginning. Their mission is growing, and we have a picture of a beautiful child waiting for her heart procedure. Their greatest achievement is that all children, regardless of race, color, gender, religion, or financial consideration, are treated with finest medical care and the cutting edge of technology. By mending the hearts of children, regardless of their origin, Save a Child's Heart is contributing to a better and a more peaceful future for all of our children. They proclaim, to save a child is to save the world. Volunteer staff of more than 70 to 80 medical personnel gives selflessly. The doctor who met with us said that joining the volunteers at Save a Child's Heart had doubled his hours, but not his pay. And yet he serves with passion and dedication. We visited a modern facility that has been built to house volunteers along with young patients and their families as they await life-saving surgery. Although a big building, it has that home away from home feel. It's fully equipped with a large kitchen where families can cook foods that are familiar to them. The day we visited, the air was filled with the scent of wonderful spices of Indian food that it was being prepared by and for the families. At the hospital, we were introduced to 3 Palestinian women from the Gaza Strip. They were there, sitting in a waiting room in the most modern city of Israel. They were grandmas, waiting for their grandchildren to come out of surgery that they could not have gotten in Palestine, surgeries that would save their grandchildren's lives. I asked them if I might take their photo, and as I did, it occurred to me that I was just like them. I could have been on the other side of the camera. I too would do anything to save my grandchild's life, even if it meant crossing enemy lines to get help. And maybe then I realized they wouldn't be my enemy anymore. Save a Child's Heart is working at peace in a different way. And as we see the children whose lives are saved, we see in Save a Child's Heart the creative power of hope. Here are 2 people, ordinary yet very extraordinary. One a Palestinian farmer, the other an Israeli doctor, who have made and are making a difference in the world because they believe in the creative power of hope. They believe the world can be a better place for our children and our grandchildren. In the midst of the messiness of life, a child indeed enters again, the Prince of Peace, who invites us on the journey of a lifetime, to participate in the creative power of hope, to participate in the already but not yet fully kingdom of God. We hear the voice of Micah ringing in our ears, and we join with our brothers and our sisters around the world, with Daoud and with Amram and with countless others to make a difference. And together we raise our voices. Come, thou long expected Jesus. Amen.